August 14th, 1943. 4:12 p.m., 23 miles east of New Georgia. The Pacific sun hung low and merciless over the deck of PT-219, turning every metal surface into a forge. Marcus Webb stood exposed on the bow, boots planted wide against the vibration of twin engines, roaring at full throttle. Salt spray misted across his face. The smell of diesel fuel and hot oil filled his lungs. Above him, descending through 200 feet of crystalline air, 8 Japanese A-6M0 fighters cut through the sky in tight V formation. Their green fuselages flashed in the late afternoon glare. The sound of their engines built from a distant hum to a mechanical scream that seemed to compress the air itself. Webb shouldered the rifle, a long black weapon with a vented shroud and a precision-machined receiver that nobody on this boat respected, nobody wanted, nobody believed belonged anywhere near the front lines of the United States Navy. The lead Zero opened fire first. Green tracers arced low over the water, slapping the surface with sharp whipping sounds that walked toward the bow like a man striding through shallow surf. PT-219's twin 50 caliber guns tracked left, barrels sweeping, trying to find the angle. Too slow. Always too slow. Webb's finger moved to the trigger. His breathing steadied. The weapon felt cold against his cheek, almost alien among the heavy naval guns surrounding him. A rifle built from spare parts and mail-ordered components that had arrived in plain cardboard boxes. Boxes the officers never bothered to inspect. A rifle nobody trusted. A rifle nobody respected. A rifle the Navy hadn't approved. In 2 minutes and 58 seconds, everything would change. But at 4:12 p.m., with the Zeros closing and the tracers walking closer, and the crew shouting behind him, that ending hadn't happened yet. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1927. Marcus Webb grew up in a narrow brick house on the south side of Pittsburgh, 2 blocks from the Monongahela River, where the steel mills lined the banks like iron cathedrals. His father worked the homestead steel furnaces, coming home each night with blackened hands and the smell of molten metal soaked into his clothes. By age 12, Marcus was sweeping metal shavings off the shop floor, learning the rhythm of machines long before he learned algebra. The steady pulse of stamping presses, the whine of belt-driven lathes, the particular sound a drill bit makes when it bites true into cold steel. He worked with his hands because everyone in his family did. Strong hands, calloused knuckles, fingernails permanently outlined in black no matter how hard he scrubbed. At 16, he was repairing neighbors' radios for cash, tuning carburetors for dock workers, machining replacement parts on battered lathes that rattled like they might shake apart mid-cut. He developed an eye for precision, a feel for tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. He boxed in the evenings at the local gym. Not because he liked fighting, but because he liked precision. Foot placement, timing, angles, reading movement, predicting outcomes, striking first when he saw an opening. Coaches called him stubborn. Others called him reckless. He called it paying attention. When war came in December 1941, Marcus enlisted in the Navy expecting machinery and engines. Instead, through a combination of paperwork error and timing, he found himself assigned to PT boats in the Solomon Islands, where improvisation mattered more than regulations, and where men with mechanical instinct were worth their weight in fuel. Even there, he stood out. Not because he was loud, not because he bragged, but because he wouldn't accept things that didn't work. If a gun mount jammed, he pulled it apart. If a part broke, he made a new one. If a weapon performed below specification, he tested it, measured it, modified it. His flaw was simple. When something failed, he refused to stop until he understood why. Officers called it insubordination. Other enlisted men called it stubborn genius. Webb just called it fixing the problem. That trait, frustrating to superiors and invaluable to peers, would lead directly to the bow of PT-219, to a mail-order rifle, and to the most improbable 3-minute engagement of the entire new Georgia campaign. June 1943. The Solomon Islands. The squadron had learned the hard way that the standard defensive armament on PT boats suffered from a fatal flaw everyone knew about, but nobody fixed. The forward and aft-mounted 50 caliber Browning M2 guns locked into semi-fixed arcs. They couldn't track fighters during ultra-low passes. The mounts were designed for strafing barges and repelling small craft, not for nimble aircraft coming in at 320 knots, barely 10 feet off the water. Doctrine assumed fighters wouldn't risk head-on approaches at wave height because of prop wash spray and limited reaction time. Doctrine was wrong. The Japanese pilots of the 20th Air Group, operating from Balale Airfield, had learned the blind spot by mid-May. A Zero would drop to deck level, accelerate, slip beneath the firing arc, and rake the deck with 20mm cannon fire. The gunners couldn't follow. The mounts couldn't depress that low. Everyone knew it. Everyone watched men die because of it. The engineering specifications were precise. The Browning M2 mounts on PT class boats were bound by a 9-degree depression limit. Anything lower required completely different geometry, one that didn't exist on Navy vessels of their class. The Zero pilots didn't need to be geniuses. They simply attacked from 10 degrees below the deckline, slipping perfectly into the blind wedge. Webb explained it to the engineering officer on July 8th, pointing to hand-drawn sketches with carefully measured angles. "Sir, the mounts can't track low enough. The fighters know it. They're exploiting the same wedge every single time." Lieutenant Garvey barely glanced at the paper, adjusting his cap against the glare. "It's within specification, Petty Officer." "With respect, sir, specification is getting men killed." "That will be all. Dismissed." Another wall, another death sentence wrapped in regulations. But before Webb could find another way, before he could build anything, he had to watch 3 men die. 3 friends whose deaths would crystallize his frustration into something harder. Something that would drive him to break every rule that stood between a problem and its solution. June 4th, 1943, 2:47 p.m. Motor machinists mate Randall Hayes stood at the port gun on PT-207, tightening a feed cover that had worked loose during the morning patrol. He was 22 years old, from Tacoma, with a quick smile and a tendency to hum while he worked. Webb had shared poker games with Hayes the night before. They'd traded cigarettes, talked about what they'd do when the war ended. Hayes wanted to open a garage in Washington, work on cars, maybe get married. The Zero came in low from the east. Too fast, too precise. Hayes was still humming when the tracers walked across the deck. 20mm rounds that punched through steel and flesh with equal indifference. He died instantly, face down beside the ammo locker, the wrench still in his hand. Webb helped carry his body ashore that evening. Hayes wasn't heavy. The war had stripped weight from all of them, but the walk from the dock to the medical tent felt like miles. They laid him on a canvas tarp. Someone closed his eyes. Someone else found a blanket. Webb stood there for a long moment, looking at the face of a man he'd known for 8 months, a man who'd been humming 3 hours earlier. The medical officer wrote catastrophic thoracic trauma on the report. The men wrote nothing. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. June 14th, 1943. 4:23 p.m. Seaman Garrett Sullivan was 19 years old, from Boston, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger than he was. He'd lied about his age to enlist. Everyone knew it. Nobody cared. Webb was on deck when Sullivan screamed. A Zero had swept in during another low pass, and the burst caught Sullivan in the legs, femoral artery, the kind of wound that turns the deck red in seconds. Webb dropped his tools and ran. He held pressure on the wounds the entire ride back. his hands slick with blood that wouldn't stop coming. Sullivan's face went white, then grey. His breathing turned shallow. "Am I going to make it?" Sullivan asked once, his voice barely audible over the engines. Webb kept pressure on the wounds. "Hold on, we're almost there." They docked 1 minute later. Sullivan had already stopped breathing. The medical officer wrote catastrophic femoral trauma on the report. Webb washed Sullivan's blood off his hands in a bucket of seawater. The water turned pink. His hands shook. He didn't sleep that night. June 27th, 1943. 11:34 p.m. Lieutenant Richard Blake commanded PT 214. He was popular, quiet, steady. A man who treated enlisted men with respect instead of contempt. He'd stood watch with Webb dozens of times, talking about home, about the war, about nothing in particular. Blake's boat was tracking suspected transport barges near Vella La Vella when the Zero approached from the east. Webb watched from PT 219, 300 yards away. He saw the fighter drop low, saw the muzzle flash from the 20mm cannons, saw the burst cut the cockpit in half. PT 214 burned for 30 minutes before slipping under. The flames reflected orange across the dark water. Men screamed. Some jumped. Some didn't make it off. Blake had been in the cockpit. There was nothing left to recover. The squadron lost 7 PT boats in 6 weeks, 18 men killed, 32 wounded, a casualty rate approaching 40%. And the reason was always the same. The mounts couldn't depress low enough to hit incoming aircraft. The Navy's official response came in a single line in a maintenance bulletin: mount depression within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters meant acceptable losses. Webb refused to accept either. July 10th, 1943. Webb made his first attempt to solve the problem the only way he knew how. He modified the elevation mechanism on the forward 50 caliber mount, machining a new pivot point that would allow an additional 6 degrees of depression. He worked on it for 3 nights, alone in the forward compartment, using hand tools and careful measurements. The modification was elegant. Simple, it would work. Lieutenant Garvey found it during a routine inspection. "What the hell is this, petty officer?" Webb stood at attention. "An improvement to the mount depression, sir. It adds 6 degrees of bar. You modified Navy property without authorization?" "Sir, the current mounts can't track." "I know what the mounts can do, Webb, what they're designed to do, what they're authorized to do." Garvey's face flushed red.
"You just destroyed a perfectly good weapon system because you think you know better than the Bureau of Ordnance?" "Sir, men are dying because there's a war on, and you just earned yourself a court-martial." The court-martial never happened. Too much paperwork, too many questions, but Webb was stripped from motor machinist's mate second class to seaman. Demoted. Humiliated. The modification was removed. The mount was returned to acceptable parameters.
The mockery started that night in the enlisted mess. Officers at their table, loud enough for everyone to hear. Genius mechanic destroyed Navy property. Pittsburgh thinks he knows better than Washington. Maybe he should write a letter to the president. Tell him how to win the war. Laughter. Always laughter. Webb ate his meal in silence, cleaned his tray, walked back to his bunk. But inside, something hardened. Frustration became obligation. Anger became focus. If official channels wouldn't fix the problem, he'd have to fix it himself. In secret, without permission, without any of the protections regulations were supposed to provide. July 15th, 1943, midnight. Webb's second attempt came 5 days after the demotion. He'd scavenged parts from the machine shop, a rifle barrel from a damaged Springfield, a trigger assembly from a junkyard crate someone had shipped from Manila. Scrap steel for the receiver he'd welded together himself. He assembled it in the forward compartment by flashlight. No precision measurements, no tolerance checks, just desperation and anger welded together with whatever he could find. The test fire happened at 2 a.m. in an empty storage shed near the fuel depot, sandbags stacked against the far wall, canvas backdrop. He braced the rifle against more sandbags and rigged a lanyard to the trigger so he could pull it from 15 feet away. Smart decision, the barrel split, not dramatically, not like in movies. Just a sharp crack and a spray of metal fragments that tore through the canvas backdrop and buried themselves in the wooden wall behind it. One fragment passed 6 inches from where Webb's head would have been if he'd been shouldering the weapon. He stood there in the darkness for a long moment, flashlight beam picking out the destroyed rifle on the ground. The split barrel. The shrapnel pattern on the wall, the close call that could have blinded him or worse. Footsteps approached. Webb tensed. Bosun's mate Winslow Thatcher appeared in the doorway, red hair bright even in the dim light. He was 20 years old, from the Bronx, with quick eyes that took in the scene immediately. What happened? Webb picked up a piece of the split barrel. The metal had torn along a seam he'd welded too quickly, too carelessly. The tolerances were wrong. The heat treatment was wrong. Everything about it had been improvised and desperate and dangerous. "Junkyard parts don't have tight enough tolerances," he said quietly. "I need precision components, real ones." "Where do you get those in the middle of the Pacific?" Webb didn't answer, but he was already thinking. Catalogs, mail order, civilian suppliers back in the States who didn't ask questions about what sailors wanted to build. Winslow looked at the shrapnel in the wall, at Webb, at the determination that hadn't dimmed despite nearly dying. "You're insane," he said finally. "Probably. But I won't tell anyone." Webb met his eyes, nodded once. 3 days later, he'd find exactly what he needed. And this time, he'd build it right. July 25th, 1943. Evening. Webb returned to his bunk after an engine maintenance shift to find an envelope on his pillow. No name, no markings, just plain Navy stationery, the kind used for official correspondence. He looked around. The berthing area was empty. Everyone else was at chow or on duty. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a blueprint, hand-drawn but executed with professional precision. It showed a barrel shroud design with specific venting patterns that would reduce heat buildup during rapid fire. The measurements were exact, the angles were calculated. Someone who knew firearms had drawn this. At the bottom, in neat handwriting that had been carefully disguised, "Fix it, I'll look the other way. A friend in high places." Webb turned the paper over. Nothing. He examined the envelope again. No return address. No indication of who'd left it. Someone in the officer corps knew what he was trying to do. Someone with enough authority to risk their career by helping. Someone who'd lost people to the same blind wedge and couldn't officially do anything about it, but could do this. He never found out who, but he kept that blueprint. And when the components arrived and he began the final build, he incorporated that shroud design exactly as drawn. It worked perfectly. July 28th, 1943. Forward compartment, PT-219. Webb was checking fuel line connections in the forward compartment when he found the catalogue tucked behind a coil of spare rope. Water-stained, dog-eared. Someone had left it there, though he never discovered who. Illinois Gunsmith Supply, Spring/Summer 1943. He flipped through the pages slowly, past shotguns and pistols and hunting rifles designed for deer and elk and targets that didn't shoot back. Then he stopped on page 47. Precision rifle components, build your own marksman system. Machined receivers, precision barrels, custom sight assemblies, everything modular, everything designed to be assembled by someone with basic tools and mechanical aptitude. His mind started working. Angles, depression, tracking speed. A rifle had no mount restrictions, no fixed arc. A man could track a target with his whole body, compensating for movement, adjusting in real time. A rifle could do what the .50 calibers couldn't, if he built it right. He spent that night studying page 47, measuring angles with a protractor, calculating tolerances. By dawn, he'd filled out the order form in careful block letters using his personal funds. $47.50. He mailed it the next morning through the Navy Postal Service, addressed to himself as personal effects. August 2nd to 11th, 1943. The weight. The first box arrived August 2nd. Plain cardboard, heavy. The receiver and stock assembly. The second came August 7th. The barrel and shroud. The third arrived August 11th. Magazine, springs, sight components, and the flash hider. Webb hid them all under spare canvas in the forward compartment. Winslow stood lookout during the night watches, bringing coffee, warning when officers made their rounds. "You really think this'll work?" Winslow asked on the second night. Webb was studying the mysterious blueprint, comparing it to the shroud components. "It has to." "What if it doesn't?" Webb thought about Hayes humming, Sullivan bleeding, Blake burning. "Then at least I tried." August 11th to 13th, 1943. The build. He started assembly the night the final components arrived. The forward compartment became his workshop, a single red utility lamp, the smell of solvent and fuel oil, humidity that made everything slick with moisture. He spread a canvas cloth over the workbench and laid out the components one by one like a surgeon preparing instruments. The machined steel receiver felt solid in his hands. Quality work, precision tolerances. He fitted it into the stock, tapping the crosspins into place with a brass punch. The metal was slick with packing oil. The smell reminded him of his father's mill locker of Pittsburgh, of a world that seemed very far away. He attached the barrel next, 22 inches of precision steel designed for 800-yard accuracy. Threading it carefully, checking alignment with calipers, tightening with a padded wrench until the shoulder met the receiver with a satisfying solid stop. His thumb slipped on the oil-coated metal. The edge of the shroud caught his thumbnail, slicing a thin line that immediately welled red. Blood smeared across the barrel. He wiped it away with the rag tucked into his belt and kept working. Headspace check. Depth gauge. 2.4 pounds of closing tension. Perfect. Exactly within specification. The custom front sight post came next. He'd machined it himself on the boat's small lathe, working from the mysterious blueprint specifications. 3/8 of an inch above the shroud, giving him the low-angle tracking capability the mounts couldn't achieve. It wasn't Navy standard, it wasn't anything standard, it was pure function, built for one job. The vented barrel shroud went on next. Following the blueprint's design exactly, the vent pattern would dissipate heat, prevent barrel distortion during rapid fire. Another touch of genius from his unknown benefactor. At midnight on August 12th, he attached the flash hider. 6 inches of slotted steel designed to reduce muzzle rise, essential for tracking a diving aircraft through multiple shots. At 1:15 a.m. on August 13th, he inserted the magazine, 20 rounds. It clicked into place with mechanical precision, firm, correct, ready. He stood up, holding the finished weapon. It felt solid, balanced, right. A rifle the Navy didn't authorize. A rifle that could get him jailed. A rifle he believed could save lives. Winslow appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "It's done?" Webb nodded. "What now?" "Now we wait for a chance to prove it works." He wrapped the rifle in canvas, locked it in a storage locker. Commitment replaced fear. Action replaced hesitation. Tomorrow was August 13th. The next day, August 14th, PT-219 would patrol east of New Georgia, and everything would change. August 13th, 1943. Evening. The dock. Webb carried the canvas-wrapped rifle from the forward compartment just as the sun touched the western horizon. Orange light painted the water. Heat still radiated from every metal surface. Gunner Chief Deacon Strauss stood near the fuel drums, supervising the evening refuel. He was a thick-shouldered man from Georgia with a reputation for running the tightest gun crews in the squadron. He saw Webb with the bundle. "What's that, Pittsburgh? Your mail-order pop gun?" Webb kept walking. "Just a rifle, Chief." Strauss grinned, loud enough for the other men to hear. "Webb thinks a Sears catalog beats Japanese fighters. I'll take that bet." Laughter rippled across the dock. Men looked up from their work. Some smiled. Some shook their heads. The demoted mechanic with his mail-order solution. Webb didn't respond. He stowed the rifle carefully near the bow, wrapped in canvas, tucked behind spare coils of line where it wouldn't draw attention during tomorrow's patrol. Winslow appeared beside him, voice low. "You really bringing that tomorrow?" Webb checked the canvas wrap one more time, made sure it was secure. "Yeah. You know they'll court-martial you if it goes wrong." "I know." Winslow nodded slowly. Hayes would have appreciated this, the crazy, stubborn genius of it. Webb didn't answer. He finished securing the rifle and walked back toward the crew quarters. Behind him, the laughter continued. The mockery. The disbelief that a $47 catalog rifle could solve a problem that had killed 18 men. None of it mattered. Tomorrow would prove everything, one way or another. The sun dropped below the horizon. Night fell across the Solomon Islands, and Marcus Webb slept 4 hours before the patrol that would redefine everything the Navy thought it knew about defensive warfare. August 14th, 1943, 3:50 p.m. DP. The engines of PT-219 thundered to life with a deep mechanical roar that vibrated through the wooden hull. Fuel smell rose sharp from the vents, mixing with the salt air and the lingering heat of the afternoon sun. The deck radiated warmth through the soles of Webb's boots as the boat eased away from the dock and turned toward open water. The patrol orders were routine on paper. Scout for barge movement east of New Georgia. Probe the edges of Cooler Gulf. Standard reconnaissance. Dangerous in practice, but standard. Webb had boarded 30 minutes earlier with the canvas-wrapped rifle slung low on his shoulder. He'd tucked it behind spare coils of line near the bow, exactly where he'd planned. Most of the crew assumed it was another piece of engine gear, another repair kit, the kind of thing a demoted mechanic might carry around. The officers didn't notice. Officers almost never noticed things that weren't in manuals. Lieutenant James Harrison stood at the helm, studying the horizon through binoculars. He was a lean man, mid-30s, with the kind of quiet competence that inspired loyalty rather than demanded it. He'd served on PT boats since Guadalcanal. He knew these waters. He knew what happened to boats that got careless. The forward gunner, a thick-armed sailor named Kowalski, wiped down the starboard .50 caliber Browning with a rag. The metal gleamed in the late sunlight. The ammunition belt hung ready, brass cartridges catching the light. Winslow Thatcher checked the torpedo safety pins on the port side, his red hair bright against the dark water. He glanced at Webb once, a quick look that said everything without words. The canvas bundle sat near the bow rail, unremarkable, ignored. By 4:10 p.m., PT-219 cut through the slight chop at 34 knots. The engines maintained their synchronized vibration. Spray began to bite across the bow as they cleared the bay. Visibility stretched 10 miles in every direction. No clouds, no cover. Perfect conditions for fighters hunting slow-moving boats. Webb crouched by the bow rail, hands steady on the metal, eyes scanning the horizon. The sun hung lower now, casting long shadows across the water. The air tasted of salt and diesel. and something else, something electric. The feeling before a storm breaks. He didn't announce the weapon, didn't explain, didn't warn. No point. If it worked, they'd live. If it didn't, they wouldn't. All he could do was wait. 4:10 p.m. The radio crackled with static. Then a voice cut through, clipped and urgent. PT-219, this is PT-214. Multiple bogies bearing 080, altitude 1500, closing fast. Harrison lowered the binoculars. His jaw tightened. Helm, come right 10 degrees, all hands keep sharp. The boat heeled slightly as it turned. Men moved to positions without being told. Kowalski swung the forward .50 caliber mount, checking the traverse. The barrel tracked smoothly left to right. Webb's heartbeat slowed. His breathing settled into the rhythm he'd learned in Pittsburgh boxing rings. Slow, controlled, present. The bow felt solid beneath him. The vibration of the engines traveled up through his boots, through his legs, into his chest. He became part of the boat, part of the machine. At 4:11 p.m., the lookout spotted them. Zeros, 8 aircraft. Bearing 085, descending. Webb turned his head. There, 8 dark shapes against the pale sky, sunlight flashing off green fuselages. They were already committed, already fast, already diving in that shallow attack formation that had killed so many men. Harrison's voice carried across the deck, calm but sharp. Gunners, stand by. The forward mount swung toward the approaching fighters. Too slow. The angle was wrong. The depression couldn't meet the approach vector. The Zeros descended lower, 30 feet above the water now, engines screaming, prop tips flickering white where they disturbed the air. Radio static snapped again. Zeke's inbound. Repeat, Zeke's inbound. Hold steady, Harrison called. Kowalski at the forward gun. Angle's bad, sir. Can't track them. It was the same problem, the same blind wedge, the same death sentence wrapped in acceptable parameters. Doctrine said the fighters wouldn't come this low. Doctrine had been wrong for 3 months. Webb unwrapped the rifle. The canvas fell away. Metal gleamed in the sun, dark and purposeful. The precision barrel, the vented shroud, the custom front sight he'd machined himself. He braced against the bow stanchion, feeling the solid steel against his hip. His hands moved automatically, chambering around. The bolt slid with a clean, controlled click that was immediately swallowed by the engine roar and the approaching scream of fighter engines. Kowalski glanced over from the .50 caliber mount. Webb, what the hell is that? Webb brought the rifle to his shoulder. He didn't answer. The Zeros were coming in at 400 knots, closing the distance with mechanical precision. 7 seconds to impact range. The first Zero dropped lower. Too low for the mounts. Perfect for him. Webb planted his feet wide, sighted in, the iron sights lined up with the approaching fighter. He could see details now, the glint of the canopy, the rising sun emblem on the cowl, the prop wash tearing white streaks across the water behind it. Webb, Kowalski's voice rose. Get off the bow! You'll get yourself killed. Gunner Chief Strauss appeared from amidships. Saw the rifle, saw Webb's stance. Pittsburgh's lost his goddamn mind. Webb ignored them all, ignored the spray, ignored the wind, ignored the disbelief and the fear and the mockery that had followed him for weeks. He held his breath, felt the trigger under his finger, cold metal, precise resistance, and fired. 4:13 p.m. The first shots. The rifle kicked hard against his shoulder, sharp recoil but controlled by the flash hider. A single brass casing spun past his cheek, glinting in the sunlight before disappearing over the rail. The round splashed into the water 15 feet left of the Zero's nose. Miss, Webb worked the bolt. Chambered another round. The Zero kept coming, Closer now. 300 yards. 250. He adjusted. Windage. Lead. The calculations happened automatically. Muscle memory from 1,000 hours on Pittsburgh, firing ranges and boxing rings, reading movement, predicting trajectory. He fired again. The round went high, passing over the Zero's canopy. Miss! The crew's groans were audible even over the engines. Kowalski half turned from his mount. I knew it. Waste of... Webb fired a third time. Too much compensation. The round splashed 20 feet right, 3 shots, 3 misses. The Zero bore down on them at 350 knots. 200 yards now, close enough to see the pilot. Marcus! Winslow's voice cut through everything. Sharp, clear. The same voice that used to call out combinations in the gym back home. Breathe like the gym! Webb blinked. The adrenaline was making him think too much. Calculate too much. His old boxing coach's voice echoed in memory. Stop thinking, kid. Just see the target. Let your body do what it knows. He exhaled completely. Let the calculations fall away. Just watched the Zero. Just felt the rifle. Just existed in the moment between one heartbeat and the next. He fired. Kill number 1. 4:13:22 p.m. The round struck the Zero's oil cooler at 180 yards. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then black fluid sprayed across the canopy in a dark mist. The Zero wobbled. Just slightly, just enough. Webb didn't wait to see the result. He worked the bolt, fired again. The second round punched through the engine cowling. Metal sparked. The third hit something critical deep in the engine assembly. The Zero jerked hard to the left. Its right wing dipped. The fighter began to tumble, slowly at first, then faster. Metal shards flashed in the sunlight as the aircraft came apart. It hit the water in a massive spray of white foam and debris. The sound of the impact rolled across the water, thunder made of aluminum and violence. The crew fell silent. Webb shifted left. The second Zero was already banking hard, coming in lower than the first. Its 20mm cannons flashed. Orange arcs hammered the water. Rounds ripped past the bow in white streaks, close enough that Webb felt the pressure wave. He tracked the nose, exhaled, fired. Kills 2 and 3 4:13, 35 to 4:13:50 p.m. The bullet hit the canopy frame. Metal and plexiglass shattered. The second shot, a heartbeat later, caught the pilot in the shoulder. The Zero rolled violently to the right. Its left wingtip clipped the surface of the water. For an instant, it seemed to skip, like a stone thrown across a pond. Then it disintegrated. Metal fragments, smoke, spray erupting upward in a column that caught the sunlight. 2 down. Chief Strauss stood frozen at his position, mouth open, the rag still in his hand. Sweet Jesus, someone whispered. The third Zero came in fast. Very fast. A vertical dive that turned into a shallow attack run at the last second. This pilot was better, more experienced. He'd seen what happened to the first 2. Webb adjusted the elevation by 3/8 of an inch, compensation for spray and deck vibration. The bow slammed through a wave. Salt water stung his eyes. Wind roared past his ears. He fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. Click, crack, kick, click, crack, kick, click, crack, kick. All 3 hit, 1 in the wing root, 1 in the cowl, 1 through the radiator intake. The Zero burst into flame mid-air. Orange fire trailed from its engine like a comet's tail. It hit the water in a long, sliding, burning arc that left a streak of black smoke across the sky. 3 down. The forward gunner, Kowalski, abandoned his .50 caliber mount. He just stared at Webb, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "It's working," he said, voice barely audible. "Mother of God, it's actually working." The formation breaks. The remaining 5 Zeros pulled up sharply, breaking their attack formation. They climbed, regrouped, circled. Webb used the moment to check his magazine. 17 rounds remaining. His hands were steady, no shake, no hesitation. The adrenaline had settled into something colder, something more focused. Harrison's voice from the helm, tight with controlled shock. "Maintain course. Gunners, stay alert." The Zeros came again, but different this time, cautious. They'd seen 3 of their squadron go down in 90 seconds to something that shouldn't exist, something their intelligence briefings had never mentioned. The 4th Zero chose a coordinated dive with a hard bank. Its cannons opened up early, trying to suppress the bow before committing to the attack run. Hot fragments tore through the air. Bits of deck splintered. Metal pinged off the hull. Webb ducked behind the stanchion. Waited. 1 breath. 2. He rose again, tracking the fighter in its downward arc. The Zero was committed now, too low to pull up, too fast to evade. 3 shots. The first missed. The second hit the engine. The third hit the pilot. The fighter twisted to the left, smoke pouring from the exhaust. It slammed into the water nose first. The impact sent up a column of spray that seemed to hang in the air for a long moment before collapsing back into foam. 4 down. Winslow's voice from somewhere behind him. 4, Marcus, 4! Kills 5 and 6. 4:14:35 to 4:14:50 p.m. The 5th Zero circled above, taking its time. This pilot was smart, patient. He watched the water where his 4 squadron mates had crashed, watched the American boat, watched the man on the bow with the impossible weapon. He chose his angle carefully. A shallow dive from the stern quarter, sun at his back. Webb waited, didn't rush, didn't waste ammunition. The rifle had become an extension of his body now. An extra limb. He could feel the weight of the remaining rounds in the magazine, could feel the heat building in the barrel. The Zero dropped, lined up perfectly with the bow. The sun flared off its canopy, making it hard to see the pilot inside. Webb fired once. The round entered through the spinner opening at the propeller hub. It hit the reduction gear, the mechanical linkage that transferred engine power to the propeller. The propeller seized instantly. The Zero pitched forward violently as if someone had grabbed its nose and yanked it downward. It plunged into the sea like a thrown spear. Vertical, perfect, gone. 5 down. The 6th Zero made a mistake. It passed overhead initially, too high for a clean shot. Then it looped around, trying to come in from the starboard side. Harrison's starboard gunner opened up with the .50 caliber. Long tracers stitched the sky. Bright lines of fire that curved with the ballistic arc. The Zero dodged left, rolling to evade. It dropped again into the blind wedge, the exact spot where the mounts couldn't track. The spot where men had died for 3 months. Webb swung the rifle, placed the sight on the pilot's chest. The distance was close now, less than 100 yards. He could see the leather flight helmet, the oxygen mask. He fired. The canopy shattered. The pilot slumped. The Zero veered hard to the right, out of control. It skimmed across the water's surface for 100 feet, tearing itself apart, leaving a trail of debris that glittered in the late sunlight. 6 down. Chief Strauss removed his cap, ran a hand through his hair. His face had gone pale. $47, he said to no one in particular. 47 goddamn dollars from a catalogue. The final 2, 4:15:45 to 4:16:10 p.m. The last 2 Zeros came together, coordinated, disciplined. A pincer attack designed to split defensive fire, 1 high, 1 low. Webb had maybe 9 rounds left. He'd lost count. He chose the low one, always the low one. The high fighter was Kowalski's problem if the .50 caliber could track it. The low Zero came in fast, 420 knots, every detail sharp. The scratches on the canopy, The oil stains on the cowling, the exhaust smoke trailing from the engine. Webb fired twice. The first shot missed, the second missed. He was rushing, letting the pressure get to him. He adjusted, a hair's breadth. The kind of measurement his father had taught him on Pittsburgh lathes. Thousandths of an inch matter. Always. The third shot struck the engine mounts. The Zero's nose dipped. It hit the water and broke into two pieces. The wings separated from the fuselage. Metal and fire and spray. The sound rolled across the water like distant thunder. 7 down. The last Zero. The final fighter screamed down at 420 knots. This pilot was good, maybe the best of the 8. He'd watched 7 men die. He knew what he was facing. And he came anyway. His cannons opened up at 200 yards. Water erupted in fountains around the bow. Shrapnel tore through the rail. A fragment passed so close to Webb's thigh that he felt the heat of it. Webb ducked, rose, fired, miss. The Zero kept coming, 150 yards now, close enough to see the pilot's eyes behind the goggles. Webb adjusted, fired. The round hit the right wing, midsection. Not enough, not lethal. The Zero kept coming, 100 yards. Webb's breathing had stopped. Everything had stopped. The world narrowed to the sight picture, the approaching fighter, the trigger under his finger. He exhaled completely, let everything go. Pittsburgh, the mockery, the demotions, the deaths of Hayes and Sullivan and Blake. All of it fell away. Just the target, just the shot, just this moment. He fired. The bullet punched through the pilot's forehead. The Zero flew on for 3 full seconds. Lifeless. A ghost plane piloted by a dead man. Then slowly the nose dipped. It crashed in a violent plume of white spray that rose 30 feet into the air before collapsing back into the sea. 8 down. Silence. For a moment there was only the sound of the engines, the wind, the smell of hot metal and cordite drifting across the deck. Webb lowered the rifle. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. The adrenaline that had sustained him for 2 minutes and 58 seconds began to fade, leaving something hollow in its wake. He stared at the water behind PT-219. 8 columns of spray, 8 patches of debris, 8 men who would not go home. The crew stared at him, wordless, stunned. Kowalski approached slowly, as if Webb might vanish if he moved too fast. What caliber is that? Webb worked the bolt. The action was smooth, precise. He could hear the mechanical click even over the engines. 7.62 millimeter. Where'd you get it? Mail order, Illinois gunsmith supply. The words seemed absurd, impossible. Mail order. As if someone could order a war-winning weapon from a catalogue the same way they'd order a wrench or a new shirt. Lieutenant Harrison stepped down from the helm. His face was unreadable. He walked the length of the deck slowly, looking at the water, looking at the sky, looking at the rifle in Webb's hands. "Sergeant Webb." He used the old rank, the one before the demotion. "What did that weapon cost?" Webb met his eyes. $47.50, sir. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. The boat's engines rumbled. Waves slapped against the hull. Somewhere, far away, seabirds called. "47.50 just saved this boat and every man on it." He turned to face the crew. "Anyone who mocks Pittsburgh after this answers to me. Clear?" Silence, then nods. The phantom 9th shot. Webb's mind was still in combat mode, still tracking threats. His body moved automatically, searching for the next target. He raised the rifle, acquired sight picture on empty sky, pulled the trigger. Click. The magazine was empty. The chamber was clear. There was nothing to shoot. He blinked, lowered the weapon. He looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. His hands started to shake. just slightly, just enough to notice. Winslow grabbed his shoulder. "Marcus! They're gone! All 8! Webb looked at the water, counted the debris fields. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 minutes and 58 seconds. He'd done it. The impossible thing. The thing the Navy said couldn't be done, the thing that would get him court-martialed if anyone official ever found out. He'd filled the blind wedge. He'd solved the problem. And 8 Japanese pilots were dead because of it. Returned to dock. 5:27 p.m. PT-219 turned toward home. The sea carried the wreckage away, scattered across miles of dark water. The crew moved quietly. No celebration, no cheering, just a profound, shaken silence. Webb sat near the bow, the rifle across his lap, wrapped again in canvas. He helped the medic tend to the minor shrapnel wounds. Kowalski had a cut on his arm. Another sailor had fragments in his shoulder. Nothing serious, nothing fatal, 0 friendly casualties. Chief Strauss approached, stood for a moment without speaking. Finally, he held out his hand. "I was wrong, Webb, about everything." Webb shook his hand. "You weren't wrong, Chief. It was insane." Insane that worked. As they approached the dock, Webb could see men gathered, crew from other boats, mechanics from the engine sheds, petty officers. Word had already spread through radio chatter. The boat that fought off 8 Zeros, the boat that came back clean, the boat with something nobody could explain. They tied up at 5:27 p.m. The sun hung low, painting everything orange and gold. Winslow stepped off first. His shirt was dark with sweat, his red hair plastered to his forehead. A bosun from PT-207 approached. "Heard you boys got jumped by a whole flight. Heard you came back clean." "That true?" Harrison answered carefully. "We had unorthodox assistance." Eyes shifted to Webb, to the canvas bundle under his arm. By sunset, half the squadron knew. By nightfall, nearly everyone. Mechanics leaned against crates, murmuring about angles and tracking arcs and the rifle thing Webb built from catalogue parts. Gunners replayed witness accounts. Officers asked quiet questions about range and pattern and speed. No official forms, no engineering memos, no sanctioned testing. Just quiet conversations in the humidity, drifting from one man to another. And 2,000 miles northwest, at Balale Airfield, Japanese ground crews were receiving the first fragmentary reports. 8 aircraft lost, single PT boat, unknown weapon system. The whispers had begun on both sides of the war, and Marcus Webb, sitting alone on the dock after everyone else had left, stared at the rifle wrapped in canvas and thought about 8 men falling from the sky. He'd built it to save his friends. It had worked. But the weight of it, the cost of it, would stay with him for the rest of his life. August 15th, 1943. Dawn. The sun rose over New Georgia the same way it had risen the day before. Hot, merciless, turning every metal surface into something that could burn skin. But something had shifted in the night, something invisible, something that would spread through the squadron like a current through water. Seaman Randall Riggs from PT-211 found Webb near the fuel drums at 0830. The smell of diesel hung thick in the air. Webb was checking oil pressure gauges, the same routine he'd followed every morning for 18 months. Riggs approached slowly. He was 23 from Ohio, with careful eyes and grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. "What did you do?" The question came out quiet, almost reverent. "How do you hit them that low?" Webb didn't look up from the gauge. The needle held steady at 42 psi, normal operating pressure, everything within acceptable parameters. It's just a rifle. No rifle does that. Riggs leaned against the drum. His hands were shaking slightly. Not 8 in 3 minutes. Webb finally met his eyes. Saw something there he recognized. The same desperation he'd felt watching Hayes die. Watching Sullivan bleed out. Watching Blake's boat burn, the desperation of a man who knew he might be next. "You keep it steady," Webb said quietly. "You track the nose, not the tail. You shoot before they start their climb, before they have time to think." Riggs pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, started writing. "The measurements, can you? 3/8 of an inch sight elevation above the shroud, 22-inch barrel, 7.62 caliber, headspace at 2.4 pounds closing tension, flash hide is essential for muzzle rise control." Riggs wrote it all down. His hand moved fast across the paper, like he was afraid the knowledge might evaporate if he didn't capture it quickly enough. "Where'd you order the parts?" "Illinois Gunsmith Supply, Spring Catalog, page 47. Riggs looked up from the paper. "Thank you." Webb turned back to the gauge. "Don't thank me yet. Just build it right. Loose tolerances get people killed." By noon, 2 gunners from PT 207 had requested transfer to bow position assignments. By afternoon, 3 mechanics from PT 215 and PT 229 were asking the same questions Riggs had asked. Same measurements, same specifications, same desperate need for something that worked. The whispers became something more deliberate, more organized. Within 2 weeks, Illinois Gunsmith Supply received orders from 6 different boats. 6 sets of components shipped to 6 different men who'd never met but shared the same problem, the same blind wedge, the same unacceptable casualty rates. By month's end, 12 boats carried unauthorized rifles near their forward positions. Some built exactly to Webb's specifications, others modified based on available parts, but all of them based on the same principle. A man with a rifle could track what a fixed mount couldn't. None of it appeared in official reports, none of it showed up in maintenance logs, none of it was sanctioned or approved or even acknowledged. But the numbers began to shift. The statistics. July 1943, before Webb's engagement on August 14th, 38% casualty rate across the new Georgia PT flotilla. 7 boats lost, 18 men killed in action, 32 wounded, average survival rate during air attack, barely 60%. These were the numbers that had driven Webb to build the rifle in the first place, numbers that translated into names, into faces, into men who'd shared poker games and cigarettes and quiet conversations about what they'd do when the war ended. August 1943, 23% casualty rate. The number dropped week by week as more boats adopted the mail-order solution. 2 boats lost, 6 killed, 11 wounded. Survival rate climbed to 78%. September 1943, 16% casualty rate. 0 boats lost to low-angle, 0 attacks. Hit probability against diving aircraft improved by 40%. The improvement wasn't evenly distributed. It clustered around the units whose gunners had either seen Webb's weapon firsthand or heard the whispers about it. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone looking at the raw data. Conservative estimates by experienced analysts, 20 to 30 boats saved, 60+ lives preserved directly or indirectly, all because one stubborn Pittsburgh machinist had refused to accept that acceptable parameters meant acceptable deaths. September 18, 1943, Balal Airfield. 2,000 miles northwest, Japanese Air Group Commander Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka sat in his sparse office reviewing mission reports for the 4th time. A metal desk, a single lamp, maps tacked to plywood walls that radiated heat even after sunset. The pattern disturbed him more each time he read through it. Since mid-August, 0 losses in the new Georgia sector had increased by 62%, but American intelligence showed no new weapons deployments, no equipment upgrades, no additional firepower beyond standard PT boat armament. Yet pilots were dying at rates that made no tactical sense. The surviving flight leaders all mentioned similar anomalies in their final radio transmissions. Forward position fire coming from angles that exceeded known mount depression capabilities. Tracking speeds too fast for mechanical systems. Precision that suggested individual marksmanship rather than suppressive fire. Something had changed. Something American intelligence wasn't broadcasting. Something that was killing experienced pilots with disturbing efficiency. Tanaka drafted a tactical directive and sent it through channels that same evening. All aircraft maintain minimum altitude of 200 feet when engaging PT boat targets. Cease all low-angle approach vectors in New Georgia sector until threat is identified and assessed. Acknowledge receipt. The directive went out across the entire 20th Air Group by dawn the next morning. The Zeros stopped diving low. The tactic that had killed Hayes and Sullivan and Blake and 18 others simply stopped. The blind wedge remained unexploited, not because the Americans had fixed their mounts, but because the enemy had learned to fear something they couldn't identify. And Marcus Webb, who would never learn about the directive, had altered Japanese tactical doctrine through nothing more than stubborn competence and $47 in catalog parts. Sometimes wars change in ways no one can see. In whispers and adjustments, and enemy pilots choosing different approach vectors because something undefined had become too dangerous. Webb had created that danger, and it would save lives for the rest of the campaign. October 1st, 1943. Squadron Headquarters. The summons came through official channels, typed on actual paper, delivered by a yeoman who wouldn't meet Webb's eyes. Petty Officer Webb, you're to report to Squadron HQ at 1400 hours. Dress uniform. Webb's stomach dropped. Dress uniform meant formal proceedings, court-martial, consequences for the unauthorized weapon, for breaking regulations, for doing what needed to be done without permission. He walked to headquarters expecting the worst. The building was corrugated metal that had baked in the sun all day. Inside, a single fan pushed humid air from one corner to another without actually cooling anything. The air smelled of hot metal and paper and sweat. Rear Admiral Christopher Thornton sat behind a desk that looked too small for his frame. He was 52 years old, with iron-grey hair and a face that had reviewed too many casualty reports. The kind of face that had learned to hide emotion behind professional neutrality. "Seaman Webb, sit down." Webb sat. The chair creaked under his weight. His dress uniform collar felt too tight. Thornton opened a folder on his desk, studied it for a long moment. When he looked up, his expression was completely unreadable. "We're restoring your rate to motor machinist's mate second class, effective immediately." He paused. "Additionally, you're being promoted to petty officer third class." Webb blinked. The words didn't make sense. He'd expected charges. Expected punishment. "Sir, I violated regulations. I built an unauthorized weapon system without—" "You will never speak of that weapon." Thornton's voice went flat, hard. "Not to the press, not to your family, not to other sailors, not in any official capacity, not ever. Is that absolutely clear?" "Sir, I don't understand." Thornton closed the folder, leaned back in his chair. The fan rattled in the corner. "Petty Officer Webb, do you have any idea what it would mean if the United States Navy publicly admitted that a demoted enlisted man's $47 catalog rifle outperformed 3 years of Bureau of Ordnance Research and Development?" Webb said nothing. "It would be politically unacceptable, professionally embarrassing, budgetarily catastrophic." Thornton's jaw tightened. Questions would be asked, funding would be redirected, careers would end. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I think so, sir." "Your innovation will be quietly studied, the principles will be quietly adopted, new mount designs will incorporate the lessons learned, training protocols will change, doctrine will shift." Thornton's eyes were hard. "But your name will not appear anywhere. You will receive this promotion as recognition for exemplary service, and you will accept it in complete silence. Understood?" Webb thought about Randall Hayes, who'd been humming when the tracers found him, about Garrett Sullivan bleeding out despite everything Webb tried, about Lieutenant Blake's boat burning while men screamed. He thought about the 60 men who were still alive because someone had finally filled the blind wedge. "Sir, I didn't do it for credit." Thornton's expression softened, just slightly, just for a moment. "I know, son, which is exactly why you're the right man to carry this secret." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "Dismissed, petty officer, and congratulations." Webb stood, saluted, walked out of headquarters 20 minutes later with new rank insignia sewn onto his uniform and an invisible chain wrapped around every word he might have said about August 14th. He'd saved lives, changed defensive tactics across an entire theater of war, and would never be allowed to speak of it. The promotion was official. The gag order was permanent. Late October 1943, an unsigned directive appeared in the weekly training bulletin, 2 paragraphs buried on page 7 between updates on fuel consumption protocols and maintenance schedules. All PT boat crews shall develop supplementary measures for tracking low-approach aircraft using available small arms where tactically feasible and operationally appropriate. Commanding officers are authorized to approve non-standard defensive positions when such measures demonstrably improve crew survivability without compromising primary mission capabilities. Vague, carefully worded, sanitized of any specifics. No mention of Webb, no mention of catalog rifles, no mention of mail-order components or Illinois gunsmith supply or page 47, no mention of August 14th or 8 confirmed kills or 2 minutes and 58 seconds that changed everything. Just permission, finally, for men to do what they'd already been doing for 2 months. The directive meant the Navy had noticed, had studied, had decided to adopt without acknowledging the source. Webb read it once, folded the bulletin, went back to work on a fouled fuel injector. The casualty rates continued to decline. September became October, became November. The blind wedge that had killed 18 men in 6 weeks killed no one for the rest of the new Georgia campaign. The statistics told a story that official reports would never acknowledge. December 1944, the Pacific Crossing. Webb's tour ended in late November. The paperwork came through quickly, processed with the kind of efficiency that suggested someone wanted him rotated home before he had time to think about talking. He packed his sea bag on a Tuesday morning, said goodbye to the men he'd served with, shook hands with Winslow Thatcher, whose red hair had faded to something darker under 2 years of Pacific sun. "You changed everything," Winslow said quietly on the dock. "I just fixed a problem." "You saved 60 lives, Marcus, at least, probably more." Webb shouldered his sea bag. "Then it was worth it." The convoy home took 3 weeks, a slow procession of ships moving east across water that had been battlefield and was now just ocean again. Men slept in crowded berths, played cards, talked about home, tried to figure out who they'd be now that the war was ending. Webb spent the night watches on deck, away from the noise, away from the questions he couldn't answer. He brought the rifle with him, still wrapped in the same canvas it had worn on PT 219. On the 9th night, the ocean was calm, almost glass smooth. Stars filled the sky so densely they seemed to merge into a single field of light. Webb unwrapped the rifle one final time. The barrel gleamed dull in the starlight. 22 inches of precision steel, the custom sight post he'd machined himself, the magazine that had held 20 rounds and changed defensive doctrine, the flash hider that had allowed him to track through 8 kills without losing sight. Picture. He disassembled it slowly, methodically, the way his father had taught him to break down machinery in Pittsburgh. Each component separated, each piece laid out on the canvas: barrel, receiver, magazine, sight post, flash hider, recoil spring, trigger assembly, the pieces of a weapon that had killed 8 men and saved 60 others. He started with the barrel, held it for a moment, feeling its weight, remembering the kick against his shoulder, then dropped it over the rail. It disappeared into darkness without a sound. The receiver went next. Then the magazine. Then the sight post he'd measured 3 times to ensure the 3/8 inch elevation was perfect. Each piece dropped separately, scattered across miles of ocean, impossible to recover, impossible to reassemble. The flash hider went last, 6 inches of slotted steel that had controlled muzzle rise and allowed precision fire against diving aircraft. He held it for a long moment, then let it fall. The splash was small, insignificant, gone in the wake of the ship. He stood at the rail for a long time after, watching the dark water. The rifle was gone, scattered across the Pacific floor. No evidence, no proof, nothing but memory and statistics and men who'd come home because someone refused to accept acceptable parameters. It felt less like destruction and more like release. The rifle had done its job. That was enough. He folded the canvas carefully, went below, slept for the first time in 3 weeks without dreaming. 1945. Pittsburgh. Marcus Webb came home to a city that looked the same but felt different. The steel mills still lined the Monongahela River. The smoke still rose in dark columns against the sky. The streets still smelled of industry and river water, and something he'd almost forgotten during 2 years in the Pacific: home. He found work within a week. A machine shop on Carson Street run by a man named Paulson, who asked exactly one question during the interview. "You know your way around a lathe?" "Yes, sir." "You're hired. Start Monday." The work was simple, precise: rebuilding carburetors, machining replacement parts for machinery that had been running since before the war. The kind of work he'd done at 16, before everything changed. His hands remembered the rhythm, the feel of cutting oil, the sound a drill bit makes when it finds purchase in cold steel, the satisfaction of tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. It felt right, familiar, safe. He married Sarah Brennan in the spring of 1946. She'd grown up 2 blocks from his childhood home. They'd known each other since grade school, played in the same streets, attended the same church. She asked him once about the war, saw the way his face closed like a door shutting. Never asked again. They bought a modest house near the river for $3,800. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a backyard where children could play. Marcus Jr. was born in 1947. Eleanor in 1949. Good kids who learned to fix things with their hands the same way their father had. Webb taught them to work lathes when they were old enough, taught them to measure twice and cut once, taught them that precision mattered because sloppy work got people hurt. He never told them about the Pacific, about PT-219, about a rifle built from catalog parts that changed defensive doctrine across 3 navies. They knew only that their father had served, had come home, had built a quiet life with calloused hands and an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. His neighbors knew even less, just that Webb fixed things, kept to himself, never complained, never bragged, never talked about the war unless someone asked directly. And almost nobody asked. Every August, 1946 to 1990. The ritual started the 1st August after he came home and continued without variation for 44 years. Just after sunset, when the steel mills across the river began to glow orange with the evening shift firing up the furnaces, Webb sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they ate dinner, where the kids did homework, where Sarah paid bills and read the newspaper. She set out the glass without being asked. Heavy crystal, a wedding gift from her aunt, 2 fingers of rye whiskey, the same brand his father had drunk after long shifts at Homestead Steel. Webb didn't toast, didn't speak, just sat and looked out the window at the glow of the mills and thought about people who didn't make it home. Randall Hayes, 22 years old, from Tacoma, who'd been humming while he worked when the tracers found him. Garrett Sullivan, 19, from Boston, with red hair and freckles, who'd bled out in Webb's arms despite everything he tried. Lieutenant Richard Blake, who'd treated enlisted men with respect and died when his boat burned. And 8 Japanese pilots whose names he never knew, men with families waiting, with children who would grow up without fathers, with wives who would receive telegrams in careful handwriting, men he'd killed from a distance with precision and necessity and no satisfaction whatsoever. Sarah asked once in 1953 what he thought about during those quiet August evenings. People who didn't make it home, he said. She understood. Never asked again. But every August for the next 37 years, she set out the glass without comment. Let him have his silence. Let him carry whatever weight he needed to carry. The ritual was simple, unchanging, private. 2 fingers of rye, the glow of the mills, the weight of memory. For 44 years, Marcus Webb mourned the same way he'd fought, quietly, efficiently, without asking for recognition or comfort, just a man at a kitchen table, remembering. July 1987, San Diego. The invitation arrived in June, Pacific PT Boat Veterans Reunion, 3 days at a hotel near the harbor, guest speakers, memorial service, informal gatherings for crews to reconnect. Webb almost threw it away. Sarah found it on the kitchen counter that evening. "You should go," she said. "I don't need to. Marcus, you never see anyone from those days. It might be good for you." He looked at the invitation, at the embossed Navy insignia, at the dates that would fall right around August 14th. "I'll think about it." 2 weeks later, he bought a plane ticket. The reunion was exactly what he expected. Old men telling old stories that had grown larger with time, boats that had been bigger, dangers that had become adventures when filtered through 4 decades of distance. He sat at the back of the garden reception on the second afternoon, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm, half listening to a Commodore talk about supply chain logistics. A woman approached, mid-40s, professional bearing, carrying a leather folder. "Mr. Webb? Marcus Webb, formerly of PT 219? He looked up. "Yes? I'm Dr. Catherine Aldrich, Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey." She gestured to the empty chair beside him. "May I?" "Sure." She sat, opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded at the edges but still clear. She turned it so he could see. The photo showed a naval weapons mount, low-angle configuration, depression capabilities far beyond what standard PT boat armament had possessed in 1943. The geometry was unmistakable, the sight elevation, the tracking arc. Webb's hands started to shake, just slightly. The photograph trembled. "This is from 1952, Dr. Aldrich said quietly. British Royal Navy, Coastal Defense retrofit. The design specifications came from American technical advisories issued in 1950. She pulled out another photograph. Australian patrol craft, 1954. Same low-angle configuration. And this one, and these. More photographs, more mounts, American, British, Australian, all sharing the same basic geometry. They're all based on observed field innovation from the Pacific Theater. August 1943, New Georgia sector. She looked at him. "Your innovation, Mr. Webb." He couldn't speak, just stared at the photographs spread across the table. "The Navy never credited you. The reports say practical field application by enlisted personnel. No names, no details." She paused. "But I've been interviewing veterans, cross-referencing unit deployments, following the paper trail of casualty rate declines.
How many? His voice came out rough. How many what? How many lives did it save? Dr. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Thousands? Conservatively, these mount designs were adopted across 3 navies. They're still in use today on some patrol craft. Your $47 catalog rifle changed defensive doctrine for 40 years. Webb picked up one of the photographs. The British mount from 1952. He could see his own design in it, the 3/8-inch sight elevation.
The depression angle that allowed tracking of low-approach aircraft. "I'm writing a paper for the Naval Institute proceedings," Dr. Aldrich said. "I'd like to finally put your name on this, give you the recognition you deserve." Webb looked at the photographs for a long moment, at 40 years of innovation built on a foundation he'd laid in secret, in defiance, in desperation, at proof that it had mattered, that it had worked, that men had lived because he'd refused to accept acceptable parameters. He closed the folder carefully, handed it back. "No." Dr. Aldrich blinked. "Mr. Webb, Doctor, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't need my name on it. These men deserve to know. Did it save lives?" "Yes, thousands." Webb nodded slowly. "Then that's enough. The men who came home because of it, that's all the recognition I need." Dr. Aldrich studied his face, saw something there that made her close the folder and hold it against her chest. "You're a rare man, Mr. Webb." "No, ma'am, just a Pittsburgh machinist who couldn't stand watching friends die." She stood, shook his hand, walked away with the folder and the photographs and the story that would never be published with his name attached. Webb sat alone for a long time after, drinking cold coffee, watching the other veterans laugh and reminisce. He'd gotten the only answer that mattered. It had worked. It had saved lives. It had changed the war. That was enough. March 1991, Pittsburgh. Marcus Webb died on a Tuesday morning in the house near the river, 76 years old. Sarah beside him. The death certificate would list cardiac arrest. Peaceful, in his sleep. The funeral was small. Neighborhood church, local people who'd known him as the quiet man who fixed things and never complained and kept his lawn neat. The obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran 4 lines. Marcus Webb, 76, of South Side, died March 12th. World War II Navy veteran, P.T. boats. Survived by wife Sarah, children Marcus Jr. and Eleanor, 4 grandchildren. Services Friday at St. Michael's. Nothing about August 14th, 1943. Nothing about 8 Japanese fighters, nothing about 2 minutes and 58 seconds that changed defensive doctrine across 3 navies. Just 4 lines, a quiet death for a quiet man. Winslow Thatcher came from New York. 78 years old now, white-haired, moving carefully on arthritic knees. He'd kept track of Webb over the decades, through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls. The friendship had endured through distance and time, and all the things they'd never talked about. After the service, after the other mourners had left, Winslow stood at the grave with Sarah. "He saved my life," Winslow said quietly, looking at the fresh earth. "Saved 60 men's lives, maybe more, beat the zeros, beat Navy bureaucracy, beat 4 decades of official silence." He paused, wiped his eyes. "With a $47 mail-order rifle that nobody believed in." Sarah took his hand. He never talked about it, but every August he remembered, every single year. That was Marcus. Did the impossible, asked for nothing, carried it all alone. They stood together in the quiet. The steel mills across the river sent up their familiar smoke. The city Marcus had never really left continued without him. Cars passed on the street beyond the cemetery gates. People went about their lives. The world turned. And somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, scattered across 1,000 miles of dark water, the pieces of a rifle that changed the war rested in silence. doing what Marcus Webb had always done, existing without recognition, working without acknowledgement, changing everything while asking for nothing. The official records of the United States Navy contain no mention of Marcus Webb's rifle, no commendation for innovation, no medal for the 8 confirmed kills on August 14, 1943, no acknowledgement of the defensive doctrine changes that saved thousands of lives across 3 Allied navies. The service record shows only motor machinist's mate Marcus Webb, petty officer, 3rd class, PT 219, Solomon Islands, enlisted 1942, discharged December 1944, honorable service. Nothing about the blind wedge, nothing about mail order components, nothing about 2 minutes and 58 seconds. But the men who survived tell different stories. They talk about a Pittsburgh machinist with grease under his fingernails who refused to accept that acceptable parameters meant acceptable deaths, who built impossible solutions from $47 in catalog parts, who stood on a bow with a weapon nobody believed in and did what the Navy said couldn't be done, who saved 60 lives and never asked for recognition, who carried the weight of 8 enemy pilots and 3 dead friends through 44 August evenings with nothing but a glass of whiskey and the glow of steel mills across a Pennsylvania river. They remember a man who changed wars without appearing in any history book, who proved that sometimes the most important innovations don't come from laboratories or committees, but from desperate men who refuse to watch one more friend die. Some stories don't need official acknowledgement to be true. Some men don't need their names in reports to matter. Marcus Webb was that kind of man, and the veterans who came home because of him, the ones who raised families and built lives and grew old in the country he helped protect, they carry his story forward in the only way that ever mattered: by living, by remembering, by raising glasses every August to the man who filled a blind wedge with precision and stubbornness and grief,